We talk about slavery often. We speak about abortion often, but the parallel between the two is not commonly made.
Welcome to Straight Talk on Life Issues. I'm Victor Nieves, your co-host. As always, we have Brad Mattis, president and founder of Life Issues Institute. Today, we're going to be talking about a subject that probably doesn't get talked about quite enough. That's the comparison between abortion and slavery in the United States. In fact, there are a considerable number of comparisons between the two, even down to things like the Dred Scott case, one of the most famous civil rights injustices of our nation's history, being a 7-2 decision, and Roe v. Wade was a 7-2 decision. But of course, that's not all of the parallels. There are many, many more, and we're going to be going into great detail on those parallels with our guests on this program.
And Victor, there were approximately 4 million slaves in the United States during the time of slavery. And in those slave states, roughly 1 in 4 owned slaves. Now get this, today in America, about 1 in 4 pregnancies end in abortion. That is a grave comparison of history repeating in very different ways. Slave owners treated slaves as property, and abortionists treat human children as property, just a clump of cells, and they sell off the body parts.
Well, that's right, Brad. And, today in America, we average about 2,300 abortions every single day. That means, for a bit of perspective, in just 3 days, Americans have murdered more children via abortion than all of the Americans that were lynched in the 86 years of our civil upheaval and injustice. Those numbers are truly hard to fathom, but they really put into perspective the scope of the evil of the abortion industry in this country. I know we're going to talk about this in much further detail later, but I want to hit on this Dred Scott case because it was one of the most egregious violations of civil rights that we've ever seen in our nation's history, and there are a ton of parallels there, down to the decision of the justices being 7-2 in Dred Scott as well as 7-2 in Roe v. Wade. That decision essentially ruled that Black people were non-persons. In Roe v. Wade, again, we saw a very similar parallel where they essentially said that the unborn were not people.
And Victor, slavery was legal, abortion is legal. Two very eerie comparisons in history.
And of course, we're going to go into much further detail about this very important topic today with our very special guests. First, we have joining us Nicole C. Mullen. Obviously, she's an undeniably talented artist. She has a tremendous legacy. She's been recognized with 2 Grammy Award nominations. She goes all over singing, performing, truly fantastic. We also have with us Catherine Davis. Catherine is the president of the Restoration Project. She oftentimes partners with the National Black Pro-Life Coalition and the Douglas Leadership Institute. She's a public speaker, civil rights champion. She's been on numerous different TV, radio, and newspaper features, including the New York Times, CNN, NPR, and many more. I want to thank both of you for coming and welcome you to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
Now, I'd like to ask you both this question. Now, according to the Washington Times, during the time of slavery, there were about 4 million people enslaved in America, Americans enslaved in America. Here's a question I want you both to weigh in on. According to the Washington Times, at the time of slavery, there were about 4 million people, Americans, enslaved in the United States. In the slave states, roughly 1 in 4 owned slaves. Now, today in America, about 1 in 4 pregnancies ends in abortion. I'd like to hear your comments, your thoughts on these. Nicole?
Wow. I did not know that. So thank you for the knowledge. I think it shows that the same spirit is still alive and is still seeking to devour and to eradicate and to enslave and to prey upon those who may not have the same privileges of others. And so I think it is a huge signal for us as believers still to stand up and be the light and to stand up for those who don't have a voice yet or whose voices are not heard. And so it is sad to hear that stark parallel is between the two. I mean, I did not know the numbers.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me, it's educational. So thank you for that. Catherine,
Yeah.
I'm gonna bat it over to you.
You know, the interesting thing about that number is that the number of slaves that were brought to America were sold into slavery by the Africans was 388,000 of them landed in America. And by the end of slavery, we had had so many children that we had grown to the 4 million number.
Wow.
And the fact that a whole class of people had their rights stripped from them, and that's what the Dred Scott case was about. It took away the citizenship of those 4 million slaves and said, nope, you're not a citizen, so you have no legal rights. And abortion has done the identical thing to babies. It has stripped away the legal rights of those humans to pursue life legally. And that's the parallel for me. It's mind-boggling that we are and still fighting that same spirit that kept 4 million enslaved. We're still fighting it, but now for the babies. And the unfortunate thing is that those babies never had a chance to live, to become a part of us.
Yeah, I think part of the sad part too, and Catherine, thank you for that, for the information and for just even the parallel. But I think part of the sad part is that before it was done to us, and now we as African Americans, we're participating in it. And some of the deaths are caused by us. The majority of abortions are from us, who are descendants of the slaves, and so that's sad for me to know that we have been convinced to kill our own. What they no longer could do legally, now they have gotten us to agree to be a part of the genocide. And so it's heartbreaking to even realize.
And look at how they did that. They persuaded us, they targeted Black women, and they've persuaded us that it is akin to a civil right to be able to terminate the lives of our children. The devil is a good devil, and he hasn't changed. And he has persuaded the very people who were enslaved that it's okay, using this whole mindset that you now have the right, my body, my choice, you control your own body. I think they call it bodily autonomy now. And you're right, Nicole, it is extremely sad that we don't see the diabolical plot that Satan waged against us and are participating. I was going to say voluntarily participating, but that's not quite true.
Manipulated voluntarily.
Yeah. And 64% of the abortions we've learned are coerced. So it's not that woman choosing for herself, her pastor, her partner, teacher,
parent,
someone with influence over her, persuading her to take the life of her child.
Wow.
Thank you. Catherine, I'd like to have you take us through the two pivotal Supreme Court decisions that relate abortion and slavery together. We're talking about 1973, the Supreme Court Roe v. Wade decision, and how does it compare with the Dred Scott versus Sanford decision of 1857?
The very same principles. The Dred Scott decision basically stripped rights from an entire class of people. They basically said, yeah, you're here, but you're not a citizen, so you don't have rights. And in 1973, they did the exact same thing to children in the womb. They said, well, we don't really know when the baby becomes a person, so they don't have rights. And what was particularly loathsome to me was they brought up the 14th Amendment which was the amendment to the Constitution that corrected Dred Scott. And they said, now, if the baby is a person, then it's entitled to 14th Amendment protection, right? And Sarah Weddington, the woman who argued for Roe, said, you are exactly right. They took that very law that was designed to protect a class of people and used it to strip it away from babies in the womb.
But there are other similar aspects of these two decisions also, are there not, Catherine? For instance, it was a 7-2 decision in both cases.
Yes, yes. And it was the spirit of these diabolical men. You know, today the abortion industry screams in men's faces and they talk about women's rights, but it was the same set of 7 men almost who, again, stripped away the rights of the baby. You're right. There are many more similarities in how they manipulated the language to bring about this decision to terminate the lives of children. And the environment in which they did it was steeped in population control. So they were really looking to control the birth rates of those they felt were not entitled to life. Just like they stripped away the rights of the slaves, saying they weren't entitled to protection because they were quote unquote property. You know, so yeah, you are right. There are many similarities in the politics and in the conditions that surrounded Dred Scott and Roe v. Wade.
And one thing that recent history has brought up, and Nicole, if you want to jump in, you just feel free to do so at any time. The Dred Scott decision allowed people to choose whether to buy, sell, or kill their property. And with abortion, the unborn child is the property of the mothers to do with as she pleases, which has involved keeping, killing, or selling, because now we have a history of them selling the baby body parts to laboratories for experimentation. So very much we're seeing that very similar case, you know, property to be bought, sold, or killed, aren't we?
I think it's a little bit different in this regard, Brad. I don't think the women realize that their baby's body parts are being sold. I really don't. I mean,
I agree. I think you're right.
Yeah. Even in light of the investigation that was done several years ago that showed that that's exactly what they're doing, I don't think most women realize that at the end of that procedure, their children are being taken and sold for experimentation purposes, in cosmetics.
I totally agree, especially after speaking with, and I can speak for just even a small population of the African-American women that I've spoken with. You know, part of the reasons for abortion is that, you know, if they allow the baby to live and they put them up for adoption, then they're afraid that somebody would harm that child, somebody would abuse that child. You know, so part of their reasoning for abortion would be to protect the baby. So if they knew that that baby was being dismembered and sold and used for adrenochrome or whatever it is, you know what I'm saying, or cosmetics, then I'm sure those same women would, you know, first I'm sure there would be a bit of a denial. No, I can't believe that, you know. But when the truth actually sunk in, I think it would put such a distaste in their mouths that it would change their behavior. But you're right, Catherine. I'm pretty sure most of us don't know that. And I've heard about that, and I've spoken about that to those that I've been able to share with. But it's disgusting. And can I say this too? I know this is a little off topic, but it kind of reminds me of even biblically when the children of Israel were in Egypt and they were enslaved by Pharaoh. And it wasn't good enough for him to have them enslaved. He wanted to kill the male children. He wanted, you know, full-term abortion upon the people that were enslaved in order to reduce their population as well. And you've spoken about population control. And so again, it's the same spirits. So it's not just a flesh and blood war that we're in, but we really are fighting against principalities and powers and spiritual wickedness in high places. And those spirits have not died yet. And so we're still contending with them.
But if we have our way, they will be well on their way, won't they?
Absolutely, yes. And eventually they will.
I want to go back to an argument that we heard back in the abolitionist day, not we personally, but of course is marked in history, where abolitionists were told that they shouldn't impose their morality on the slave owner, and that if they didn't like slavery, they didn't have to own one. What is the abortion side of that argument?
Yeah, that argument is alive and well today. You know, you see the signs, take your hands off my ovaries, or whatever they're saying, keep your hands out of my womb. And it should be available for me because it's my body, it's my choice. And the unfortunate thing for me is we in the pro-life community really haven't done a good job of dispelling that notion. We've kind of been reactive rather than proactive in terms of our language and reshaping the conversation towards the humanity of the child. So the abortion industry spent billions of dollars objectifying the child, making it something that's not a human being. You know, you remember the argument for a while with Hillary Clinton, when does the baby become a baby? I don't know if you remember that, but so we have that same spirit, that same mindset, that it's up to the individual person, not, and if you don't want to do it, then don't do it, but don't take the right away from me kind of mentality. And just now, as we've been talking, I'm thinking, you know what? We really do need to let women know that their children's body parts are being sold. You know, I think if we did a better job of that, then that whole argument about what they said to the abolitionists and what they're saying to the pro-life community today would kind of die a little bit if we made it known. So I'm excited about that. I learned something new today.
Same here. Same here. And I think you're so right, Catherine. I think especially if we can name it to where it's not just a blob of flesh. I think if they still think that it's just a blob of cells being sold, it doesn't have the same resistance as if you knew that it was. No, they actually dismember the head. The heads are sold for certain prices. The arms are sold for certain prices. The spleen is sold for certain price. Like there are different parts of your baby's body that are dismembered and sold, you know, and so it's not just, you know, a blob of cells.
Which brings us to today in these abortion pills. I think as they are handing out these abortion pills like candy, women are going to see for themselves that, wait a minute, this is not a blob of cells. It's a baby, and we need to be prepared to help them understand that that baby that they are now seeing in the floor of their bedroom or in the toilet in their bathroom, or, you know, wherever the child is being delivered, that it's a baby, and that the industry is so diabolical. They were taking that child and selling it. I think that's a good move on our part. So
I think you're right. You're right.
Highlight that. Yeah,
you're right. Okay, I was going to say that I've made a little headway with even a few of the African-American women that we've, you know, had conversations about this with, or several, in regards to just reminding them of who we are and who we were. And I said, think about it. This is not even us as a culture. Like, we have a history of, if you can't take care of your child, grandma will, auntie will, somebody else in the family will. Like, we don't destroy our own. Like we are known to take in other people's kids. Like my grandparents, they were foster parents. They adopted kids. My parents were foster parents. They adopted children. You know, I've adopted a son. So that's what, not just my legacy, but a lot of us have history of us taking care of each other, even in slavery. You know, if you were separated and put, you know, over somebody else's plantation, then you were assumed into the family of slaves. You became Big Mama's child, you know, so that's what we know. But now it's as if we have been sold such a lie that we don't even know who we are anymore, to where we think that it's okay for us to kill our own instead of protecting our own and protecting the little nephews and nieces that are coming from my sisters. And so it's the conversations that I've been able to have in regards to that has kind of felt like an awakening in some of us of who we are. I said, because it seems as if we have swallowed the pills of Margaret Sanger and that whole, you know, movement of eugenics, like they wanted to wipe us out, and they have it in writing and we didn't know about it. But part of their plan was to get us to convince us to kill us. And so now we're living it out, but we have to know who we are, where we come from, so that we can stand up and wake out of this stupor of killing our children instead of protecting them. And so I think that conversation may need to be had, you know, more as well.
Thank you. And we're going to get to a little bit more in detail regarding Margaret Sanger, but something Catherine said about women coming face to face with their babies and chemical abortion.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine, Dr. Christina Francis, who heads up a pro-life OBGYN group, I think they represent over 6,000 physicians. And she said that her practice is getting calls frequently from totally distraught women who have in their possession their aborted baby from a chemical abortion, and they are absolutely beside themselves as to what to do with their child. And when they call the abortion facility, the Planned Parenthood, they coldly tell them just to flush the baby down the toilet. And that is what chemical abortion and the abortion industry does to women. Just one example. Victor?
I wanted to ask Catherine and Nicole, specifically as Black Americans, what's the response that you get when you have the conversation that we're having today, both from pro-life friends and even from, you know, the pro-choice adversaries? What do they say in response to the black and white, the clear-cut parallels between slavery and abortion?
Oh, first of all, sorry, Catherine, I want to say this. I don't think we make that parallel. That's not, I think that's a parallel you all have probably assumed that is an obvious. It's not. So even having this conversation, I'm like, oh, wow. We talk about slavery often. We speak about abortion often, but the parallel between the two is not commonly made. So Catherine, I'll bat it to you.
No, I agree. I think you're right. We don't typically think of it in that way because I think most Black people think of it in terms of what Martin Luther King and them did for civil rights, but they're not looking at it from the perspective of, wait a minute, I'm losing a life. I'm taking a life. And that runs contrary to the community standard, so to speak. When Roe v. Wade was decided, my mother laughed and she looked at me and said, there's not a Black woman in this nation that would ever kill her children that way. And I can just thank God she's not here to see today where Black women are leading in every area where abortion is legal. Black women are the number one customer. I think she would just be horrified to know that. We don't think of it in the same way, but my mother did. And her comment was specifically related to having come out of slavery, where our children were torn from our arms and sold to other plantations or whatever. We would never do that. She made the analogy.
Wow.
But it's been lost over the years, and we don't do that today.
I agree.
Well, following up to Victor's question, is this a comparison that we should be making in the Black community? Is it effective?
I don't think coming out the gate that it is an effective analogy, because we've allowed the abortion industry to cloak itself in a mantle of false righteousness of helping women. And so, and they have gotten different groups like Sister Song and other. Sister Song is here in Georgia, and they're a big reproductive justice organization that Planned Parenthood and others call on to help them with their messaging. They have been very specific and deliberate in trying to reject the notion that there is a parallel between slavery and abortion. So I think that is not what would work in our community today. What I've begun to do is talk about the healthcare impact of abortion. You know, they're billing it as medical, that this is akin to, I saw an article yesterday where they were comparing abortion to heart disease, diabetes. And I'm like, shut up. A baby is not
Thank you.
disease.
Thank you.
This is not medicine, but if you want to talk medicine, let's talk about it. Let's talk about the link between breast cancer and abortion and the epidemic of breast cancer among Black women today. Let's talk about abortion and autism. There is a link between abortion and autism. There's a link between abortion and premature birth and subsequent children that you want, because your womb's no longer strong enough to hold that baby. So there's other ways, I think, to get into the Black community and help us to understand in particular, but women in general who don't know that if they abort their first pregnancy, 7 to 8 years later, they may find themselves facing breast cancer. And younger. Most women don't know that, and they hide it. So I think that's the avenue to go to get people, Black, white, whatever, to pay attention that this is not a good thing. And it's not medicine.
And it's not medicine. Yes, I agree.
Okay, let's get back to Margaret Sanger. She's the founder of Planned Parenthood, an early advocate of eugenics. She certainly would have been of abortion had they had abortion more readily available. Let's talk about her and how it relates to the abortion slavery connection.
Well, honestly, Brad, Margaret was dead when abortion was legalized. I think we need to talk about Guttmacher. Most people don't know that he was the one who took over Sanger's leadership of Planned Parenthood. He was the one that seeded the cases to get abortion legal in the United States. He single-handedly changed the definition of a woman's health to include her mental health. So if she said, oh, I'm too stressed to have this child, abortion was an option for her. So he first got Estelle Griswold to give birth control to married women in Connecticut, where I'm from. And that was a violation of the law. At that time, we had laws called the Comstock laws, and they prohibited a doctor from distributing birth control to any woman. He had Estelle give married women birth control, and the case worked its way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, oh, a woman has a right to privacy over her womb, so a married woman who wants to take birth control should be able to do so. So they struck down that part of the Comstock law. 7 years later, he came back with Eisenstadt v. Baird, which gave single women the same privacy right over their uteruses. And the very next year, we got Roe v. Wade. So Planned Parenthood was behind abortion in America, but Margaret Sanger was already dead. Now, that doesn't mean, though, that her Negro Project was dead, because it was not. Her Negro Project paid Black ministers to teach and preach birth control from the pulpit. And she specifically recruited them to deliver her message under the guise that, you know, women shouldn't be forced to have children after children because my poor mama died from having too many children. Wink, wink, nod, nod kind of thing. So the Negro Project is alive and well. I mean, we see it today. We have a senator from Georgia, Raphael Warnock, who says he's a pro-choice pastor. Isn't that oxymoronic? You know? But Guttmacher was the one who cemented abortion into the American culture. And he was very deliberate. He had the cases set up. He had things, redefined. And then he went and started his little statistical organization, which is how we know him today. He's the statistician for Planned Parenthood. But no, he was way more than that. Because of him, we got abortion on demand in America.
And before, Nicole, you weigh in, I just want to point out that the Guttmacher Institute was first founded as the educational research arm of Planned Parenthood, which it has spun off since then, but it's all one continuous line of history.
That's right.
Well, can I just be honest? I have nothing to say except I feel like I'm sitting here with my smart auntie and she is teaching me. So thank you. Okay. Thank you. On behalf of the rest of us. No, we really need to know this. So thank you very, very much.
Victor?
I wanted to ask the both of you, and this may seem like an obvious question, but to some people, maybe not. When we've looked at the history of slavery, obviously extremely dehumanizing, terrible court cases affiliated with it. And when we look at abortion, to us, it may be obvious how dehumanizing the entire industry is. We've talked about Planned Parenthood, the Guttmacher Institute, but what are your thoughts on the way that the entire billion-dollar industry intentionally tries to dehumanize the victims of abortion?
Several years ago, I did a billboard campaign with Ryan Baumberger. I don't know if you're familiar. I know, Brad, you know Ryan.
Absolutely.
Ryan was conceived in rape. His mom, who was Caucasian, was raped by a Black man. And his mother put him up for adoption, and he was raised in the Mennonite community, and he had like 14 brothers and sisters. Huge family. I mean, his story is very compelling. But Ryan, when I met Ryan, we were talking one day, and I said to him, if Black children were animals, they would be on the endangered species list. And he said, I say that all the time. Wow. And so then he went and he developed this beautiful billboard that we put up in Atlanta. We put 80 of them up in the metro Atlanta area that said, Black children are an endangered species, toomany-aborted.com. Wow. When that campaign, it sent the abortion industry into a tailspin. I mean, they didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to say. Ryan and I were on every media outlet in the country. I was even on the front page of the New York Times from that campaign. Wow. Planned Parenthood paid a company called Belden Rusanello to develop a campaign against that billboard. And they are using those talking points to this day. And they went to the women of the Congressional Black Caucus and they rolled out this plan, and it went viral in their community. And they have been using those talking points ever since. Like, why do you want to make the disparities in healthcare worse? Were some of the things that they were told to say. Change the conversation. Black women usually go to church, but it's not a big deal for them. So don't focus on the fact that they go to church. Focus on choice, because they will tell you the Bible says it's okay to choose, because didn't God say choose life or choose death, right? And so they paid billions of dollars to flood the communities across the country with this messaging in terms of a woman's right. And unfortunately, they've been very successful. And so the challenge today is how to unravel that so that Black women have true understanding of what Planned Parenthood and others are doing. we have not quite yet gotten the formula to unravel it all, but it is beginning to have an impact as we are getting out and talking to more and more women and planting these seeds that abortion is not your friend.
Yeah. Wow. You know, as you were speaking to Catherine, I was thinking that perhaps one of the ways that we might be able to start reversing it is through the same door that was opened that allowed women to not have any remorse, and that's through the pastors. I think if we can start convincing some of the pastors who the women may come to, or even in passing, you know, if they believe that the pastor says, hey, there's no guilt that needs to be involved, it's not a sin, God, well, it's not a big deal, it's just a clump of cells. If the pastors are saying that still, then it gives them a pass morally. But I think if we can have conversations as well with those who may be in charge of 30 people here, maybe in charge of 1,000 people there, 5,000 somewhere else, 200 people, to where they can start speaking up for life and we can convince them, the gatekeepers, then I think we may have a better chance as well as influencing more numbers on a personal level. Because sometimes, just like even when Margaret Sanger, I think she sent a letter back in the day to Dr. So-and-so, I can't remember. I think it was in like 1938. Yeah, there you go. And she was saying, we don't want the word to get out. Like, if they will talk to their own in ways that they won't talk to us, they will be vulnerable among their own. They'll be cordial with us, but they'll share. So we need the clergy, we need the medical, we need for them to talk to the African-American community or the Black community, Negro communities, which, you know, on our behalf. So my point is, I think if we can find a way, as well as the private conversations, as well as strategically putting out the right marketing material. But if we can get to the hearts, I think, of people who say that they are men of God, women of God, to stand for what the word says and to appeal even morally again, then I think we might be able to sway it in the direction of life as well.
Oh, I 200% agree. And I spend a lot of time reaching out to pastors. In fact, the last 6-7 years, I've been working very closely with the Church of God in Christ. They are the first denomination, majority Black denomination, to declare themselves pro-life.
Really?
Yes, they
wrote
a resolution, which I helped edit and craft.
Thank you.
In
That's
2018,
huge.
they unanimously passed a resolution saying that they are pro-life denomination. And I think you're right. We need to do more of that. We need to be able to access the resources to be able to reach into the church community. But we have to get our pastors. We have to get these men who will first confess themselves, because a part of the problem we face is many of them took a woman.
Thank you.
Their girlfriend, their side piece.
Thank you. Thank
their
you. The
daughter.
usher. Exactly.
The deaconess, to get an abortion themselves. And so many of them don't feel they can say anything for fear that they will get exposed. But even with that, I think we have to go, and this time let's go to their wives. Let's get their wives.
Now you're talking. Now you're talking.
And because they will ding them at night. You know, honey, you need to talk about this. You know,
she's gonna turn the head. She's the neck.
That's right. So we if we can get to her, then we're making hay. And I've been trying to do that the last several years. I hosted teas and luncheons for pastors' wives and ministry leaders, where I took them in a room, bought them a good lunch, and gave them the information. I want to continue doing that, but I think you're absolutely right. We have to go and use, dispel Sanger's, the ghost of Sanger.
The ghost of Sanger. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's brilliant. Thank you. Wow.
Well, let me have this last question, and then we'll see if either one of you have anything to add to our conversation that hasn't been said. Now, I often say that if the abolitionists had given up before slavery was outlawed, just imagine what America would look like today. So, can the same be said about pro-lifers who are trying to end the scourge of abortion in America? Imagine an America without abortion versus what it is today. I'd like to get both of your thoughts.
You know what? Let me go first. That way you can end on brilliant.
I think the
Please,
light is
please.
shining brightly on both ends of this conversation.
No, look, that way, she can be the anchor. I'm third leg. I want to say this, and I totally believe that had they not pressed through, things would not have changed. So we've got to endure. We've got to not become weary in doing well. We've got to get back to those things that we've seen that were working or things that are working, and we need to be a part of that. Recently, this is a little bit off topic, but it's encouraged me in the past couple of months. I was able to play a part in a movie that's coming out in 2025. And I was able to play the part of a former slave. Her name was Elizabeth Freeman. And she was born in the 1700s. And she had heard about the Declaration of Independence. She had heard about the Constitution that was, newly ratified in Massachusetts. And in 1781, she went to a lawyer and she appealed for her freedom. And she said, hey, it said that all mankind, should have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then she asked the lawyer, he was white, am I all mankind? She took a risk. She heard and she acted upon it. And he took her case. And a year later, actually, she went in 1780. In 1781, the jury unanimously and the judge voted in her favor. She gained her freedom. She was the first African-American in the United States to gain her freedom because she asked for it. She was courageous enough. She pressed through. She didn't stop with just thinking, hey, well, they are free, but I'll never be. And 2 years later, all of the slaves in Massachusetts were freed. And that was almost 100 years before the rest of the U.S. was liberated as slaves. And so I'm saying, had she not endured, then she would not have been able to partake in what was designed by God for her to have. And so her story has just really infused me with new just encouragement and hope that what may not be afforded to me today doesn't mean that it'll never be afforded. Maybe God is waiting for me to take the next step. Maybe he's waiting for me to press forward in faith and in hope that things can change. And if I am faithful to do my part, I can't do someone else's part. But if I'm faithful to do my part, I can't be the lawyer. I can't be the judge. I can't be the jury, but I can be one to make a request. I can be one to have a conversation. I can be one to speak up for life. If I'm faithful to do my part, then I can trust God that eventually the dominoes will fall in our favor. And so I just wanted to share that because I didn't know about her story. Her story had never been taught to me in school. I'd never heard about it from a family member. Catherine, you probably know about it because you know all kinds of stuff, but I'd never heard of her. But her story it's now infused in my own. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what God's going to do because of that.
Catherine, top that if you can.
I cannot. But I did not know about her. So thank you for that, Nicole. Yeah. I'm going to do some research on her and include her in my presentations. That's a phenomenal story. I think that we can have an abortion-free America as soon as we really get serious about having an abortion-free America. And by that, I mean that we have to look at what have we been doing that worked and what have we been doing that didn't work, and what can we do to bring about the change that we want. So one of the things that I'm doing, my organization is called the Restoration Project, and I do projects. That's what I do, projects to spotlight where we are on the abortion question, on the question of the family and education. And I just recently learned that the majority of Black people in America live in one of 10 states. It's only 10. The majority of us live in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Arkansas, Delaware, and Maryland.
Really?
Really.
The majority of us live in only 10 states.
Yes. those 10 states.
Wow.
So I am now going to focus my effort in those 10 states, because if I can get momentum in those 10, all of the rest of the states will follow.
Absolutely.
You know, and people say, are you sure it's not Tennessee or New York? No, it is those 10 that I named. And so, Brad, I do think we can bring an end to abortion in America. And we just have to figure out what that new formula is, because what we did for 49 and a half years didn't diminish the numbers. And now the abortion industry is going to the states, like they're doing in Ohio now, to get constitutional amendments cementing abortion into the state forever. We cannot allow that to happen. So my thought is to focus on those 10 states and to go. Something else I learned real quick. There was a Fulton County, Georgia meeting of their county commissioners, and those commissioners were being asked to give $300,000 to this organization that would pay for abortions for women. They would pay to send them to other states, because, you know, Georgia has the heartbeat bill. So they would pay for them to go to a state where abortion isn't as restricted, and they would pay for their hotel, their food, their transportation. And so we went to testify to the county commissioners, urging them to please not do that. And in our testimony, there were like 7 or 8 of us that gave testimony, and none of us said the same thing. It was totally divinely orchestrated. Wow. And but the last thing that I said was, abortion is not safe. And like here in Georgia, they don't even inspect these abortion clinics. So there's no one that can tell you that it's safe. And that changed one of the commissioners' minds, and the resolution was defeated. Hey. If we are going, we go to the pastors' wives, but let's educate these other elected officials who, you know, are not our congressmen, not our senators, but they're our mayors, our county commissioners, our sheriffs, every lower level elected official. Let's go to them and educate them with some real facts about abortion in America today. So that is my strategy. And I'm hoping more of us will take a look and assess on what we can do that will bring about that end, Brad. We can't give up.
You're so right. I want to thank you both for your, I feel like I'm sitting in front of a fire hydrant with both of you, because there is wisdom coming at us from both ends.
Well, thank you for having us, Brad.
Thank you all again.
You know, the parallels between abortion and slavery are just so undeniable. They're so jaw-dropping, down to the very way that the proponents of both injustices will argue. You know, oftentimes, if you're really well studied on history, you'll start to recognize that the arguments made today in favor of abortion are literally copy and pasted. They're the exact same arguments that were used decades ago. And it makes perfect sense because there are just so many parallels between the two tremendous injustices. Brad, personally, I think this has been one of my favorite conversations that we've had so far.
Well, I knew that these two guests, once put together, would be brilliant in what they have to share for you and us. We all learned something on this panel today. And Victor, I think this is a case where we weren't really needed to ask questions. All they had to do was have a discussion.
That's true. And brilliant it was. Well, I want to direct you to our website, lifeissues.org, where we will have an abundance of resources available for you, including resources from today and our excellent guests. You can find those once again on lifeissues.org. Resources like the book from Dr. Wilkie, Abortion and Slavery, History Repeats, as well as many more. We'll also have resources from the National Black Pro-Life Coalition, and Straight Talk on Life Issues will continue, just like we did today, to tackle relevant topics, the ones that matter the most to you and I. And I want to encourage you to join the Life Defenders today. Become a part of our work to save babies and help us promote a culture of life across America. Giving monthly in any amount is a tremendous commitment to the pro-life movement. We can't all be sidewalk counselors. We can't all be out here knocking doors, but what we can do is support vital pro-life education through monthly donations. Giving monthly helps us reach more persuadable people with a pro-life message, and it enabled the creation of this very podcast. Help us do more for the babies by becoming a Life Defender today. Once again, you can easily sign up on our website, lifeissues.org. As always, while you're there, we would love to hear from you. Let us know what you thought about today's program, as well as any future topics you'd like to hear us cover. And be sure to tune in next week for another Straight Talk on Life Issues.